That pile of wood is a blight on this community, and if you don't remove it, I will." The words hung in the crisp autumn air, sharp and intrusive as the screech of a hawk. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, stood with her hands on her ample hips, her body forming a fleshy roadblock on the gravel path that marked the edge of my property. Her floral muumuu fluttered in the breeze, a garish flag planted on conquered territory. Behind her, a thin, nervous man I recognized as Herb from the HOA board fidgeted with his glasses, looking anywhere but at me. I stood my ground, my boots planted firmly in the dirt of my own 10 acres, a parcel of land I'd bought with 20 years of Army Corps of Engineers savings. The woodpile in question, Sporishaim, was in 4 cords of seasoned red oak stacked with military precision, sat a good 30 feet behind me. It wasn't just wood, it was my family's warmth for the coming winter, a monument to self-sufficiency I'd spent weeks cutting, splitting, and stacking. It was insurance against the ice storms that sometimes crippled this part of the state. Her gaze swept over it with theatrical disgust, as if she were looking at a pile of festering garbage instead of neatly arranged BTUs. This was the first time we'd spoken more than a clipped hello, and she'd chosen to make it a declaration of war. This isn't just a story about a firewood dispute. It's about what happens when petty power goes unchecked and how a little bit of planning can dismantle a tyrant. If you're tired of bullies getting their way, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Or better yet, share your own HOA nightmare story. I want to hear them. It's time we all started fighting back. Now, where was I? Yes. On the verge of committing a federal offense against a walking personification of entitlement. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind my drill sergeant taught me to take before things got loud. "Karen," I started, my voice level and calm, a stark contrast to the shrillness of her ultimatum. "This is my property. The wood is neatly stacked, it's not a fire hazard, and it's well away from any shared boundaries. It's for heating my home." I thought a reasonable explanation might diffuse the situation. I was wrong. It was like trying to reason with a hurricane. "I don't care what it's for," she snapped, taking a step forward, her fuzzy slippers crunching on the gravel she had no right to be standing on. "I am the president of this HOA, and the covenants clearly state that unseemly accumulations of debris are prohibited. That," she said, jabbing a thick finger toward my woodpile, "is an unseemly accumulation." Herb, her silent accomplice, nodded weakly, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I had read the covenants, all 247 pages of them, before I signed the closing papers. I knew the language was intentionally vague, a legal net designed to catch anything the board didn't like. But I also knew the map, the plat that defined the HOA's reach. My 10 acres were an older, grandfathered plot that bordered their pristine little subdivision. Only a small, triangular sliver of my land near the main road was technically under their jurisdiction, a concession the previous owner had made to get access to the new sewer line. The woodpile was nowhere near it. "I appreciate your concern for the community's aesthetic, Karen," I said, the words tasting like ash. "But you're mistaken about 2 things. First, that's not debris, it's fuel. And second, you're standing on my private land right now. Your authority ends about 200 yards that way." I pointed down the path toward the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of Harmony Creek. Her face, already florid, deepened to a shade of crimson I hadn't seen since a supply sergeant discovered his private whiskey stash had been replaced with iced tea. "Don't you dare tell me where my authority ends, mister," she screeched, spittle flying from her lips. "I have the bylaws on my side. You have 7 days to remove that monstrosity, or you'll start receiving a $100 a day fine. We'll see how long your private property argument holds up when we put a lien on your house." The threat was so disproportionate, so wildly aggressive, that it was almost laughable. Almost. But I saw the glint in her eyes, the pure, unadulterated joy of a petty tyrant wielding her minuscule scepter of power. This wasn't about the wood, this was about control. She saw my land, my independence, as a direct challenge to her reign. She turned on her heel with a dramatic flourish that strained the seams of her muumuu and marched away, Herb scurrying behind her like a pilot fish attached to a particularly unpleasant shark. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the crunch of their footsteps fade. The threat of a lien wasn't idle. I knew enough about HOAs to know they could, and would, make your life a living hell over the smallest infraction. But I also knew something about fighting battles on grounds of your own choosing. She had just declared war, but she had made a critical mistake. She had declared it on an engineer who understood the terrain better than she did. I looked back at my woodpile, a dark, solid shape against the setting sun. It was more than just winter fuel now. It was a line in the sand, and she had just crossed it. I walked back to the house, the anger a cold, hard knot in my stomach. My wife, Sarah, was at the kitchen window, a worried line creasing her brow. She'd seen the whole exchange. "What was that all about?" she asked as I came through the door, the scent of the beef stew she was simmering for dinner, a comforting counterpoint to the ugliness outside. "That," I said, pulling off my boots, "was Queen Karen of Harmony Creek, informing me that our winter heat source is an unseemly accumulation." I explained the conversation, the threats, the finnoes, the lean. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her hand going to her mouth. "A lien? Over firewood? Mark, that's insane." She had been so excited about this place, the peace and quiet, the space for a garden, the woods for the kids to explore when they visited. We'd moved here to escape the noise and the politics of the city, not to trade it for a suburban dictatorship. "It is insane," I agreed, "but it's also a threat we have to take seriously." The stew bubbled on the stove, forgotten for a moment. The warmth of the kitchen felt a world away from the Cold War that had just been declared in our yard. I wasn't a hothead. My entire career in the Army Corps of Engineers was built on precision, regulation, and meticulous planning. I designed and oversaw the construction of bridges, dams, and infrastructure in places where a single misplaced decimal point could have catastrophic consequences. I lived by blueprints, contracts, and codes. A fight with an HOA president, in a way, was just a small-scale version of the same thing, a battle of rules and their interpretation. "She's banking on me being like everyone else," I told Sarah, my mind already shifting from anger to strategy. "She expects me to be intimidated, to roll over and comply to avoid the hassle. She expects me to just move the wood." "Are you going to?" Sarah asked, her voice small. I looked out the window at the darkening woods. "No," I said, the words solid and final. "I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to read the manual, check the schematics, and use the rules against the person who's trying to weaponize them." After dinner, while Sarah read a book, the quiet tension still humming between us, I went into my office. It was a small room lined with bookshelves filled with engineering texts, historical atlases, and military biographies. This was my command center. I pulled out the thick white three-ring binder that had been presented to us at closing. "Harmony Creek Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions," it read in an elegant, soulless font. Beside it, I unrolled the large, crisp sheet of paper from the county registrar. My official property survey, the plat map. I spread them both out under the bright light of my desk lamp, the documents covering nearly the entire surface. For the next 4 hours, I did what I did best. I analyzed. I cross-referenced. I highlighted. I made notes in the margins. I read Karen's weapon, the CC and Rs from cover to cover. I found the clause she'd quoted, Article 9, Section 4B, "No noxious or offensive activity shall be carried on upon any lot, nor shall anything be done thereon which may be or may become an annoyance or nuisance to the neighborhood. No unsightly objects or unseemly accumulations of debris shall be permitted to remain on any lot." It was exactly as I remembered, vague, subjective, and dangerously powerful in the wrong hands. But then I turned my attention to the plat map. My property was Lot 1, a large, irregularly shaped 10-acre rectangle. The Harmony Creek subdivision, lots 2 through 58, was a newer development carved out of the adjacent farmland. I traced the boundary lines with my finger. The HOA's jurisdiction was clearly defined by the perimeter of those lots. My property was explicitly outside that main perimeter. The only point of intersection was the small, triangular piece down by the road, labeled Easement and Partial Covenant Area A. I measured the distances on the map using the provided scale. My woodpile was located at the far northern edge of my property, a full 150 feet from the nearest Harmony Creek lot line and over 600 feet from partial covenant Area A. According to the legal documents I was holding in my hand, Karen's authority didn't just end 200 yards that way. It ended precisely where the surveyor's lines were drawn, and my woodpile was nowhere near them. A slow smile spread across my face. She hadn't just overstepped her bounds. She'd pole vaulted over them. But suspicion wasn't proof. The plat map was official, but it was a copy. To win this fight decisively, I needed something irrefutable. I needed new iron in the ground. And then another thought, a darker one, surfaced. Her threat. If you don't remove it, I will. It was brazen. Was she just blustering? Or would she actually be foolish enough to trespass and take matters into her own hands? People like Karen, drunk on their own perceived power, often made stupid, emotional mistakes. That's when I remembered the trail camera. It was buried in a footlocker in the garage, a gift from my son from a few years back. I'd used it once to see what was getting into the trash cans at our old house. It was motion-activated, infrared, and it recorded high-definition video. The plan clicked into place with the satisfying certainty of a well-machined part. Phase 1. Get an official on-site survey to establish the facts beyond any doubt. Phase 2. Set up surveillance to document any further illegal activity. Phase 3. Wait for the enemy to make a mistake. I closed the binder and rolled up the map. The anger had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Karen thought she was in a shouting match. She had no idea she was actually in a chess game, and I was already 3 moves ahead. The next afternoon, the mail carrier's truck rumbled down our long driveway. Sarah brought the mail in, her expression grim. She handed me a crisp green envelope. "It's from them," she said. It was certified mail, requiring my signature. I signed the carrier's device and took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, printed with the Harmony Creek HOA letterhead. The language was a masterclass in passive-aggressive bureaucracy. "Dear property owner," it began, not even bothering with my name. "This letter serves as a formal notice of violation regarding the property located at 1280 Old Mill Road. An inspection on October 14th revealed a violation of CC&R Article 9, Section 4B, specifically the presence of an unseemly accumulation of debris, firewood pile. A fine of $100 has been assessed to your account. This fine will be compounded by an additional penalty of $50 per day until the violation is cured." It was signed with a flourish by Karen Miller, President, Harmony Creek HOA. $100 plus $50 a day. She was serious. I felt a flash of heat, the anger returning, but I pushed it down. This was just another piece of data. Another move on the board. I didn't rip it up. I didn't storm over to her house. I carefully placed the letter in a new manila folder, upon which I wrote, HOA dispute, evidence. This was no longer a personal tiff. It was a legal proceeding, and I would treat it as such. My first call was to the county surveyor's office. I explained that I needed a boundary survey for my property, specifically to have the northern line restaked and certified. "There's a dispute with a neighboring entity about the exact location of the property line," I said, choosing my words carefully. The clerk on the phone was helpful. "That's not uncommon out your way, sir. Lots of old plots meeting new subdivisions. We can have a team out there, but it'll be about a week. Is that acceptable?" "A week is perfect," I said. It would give Karen enough time to feel confident, to let the fines accumulate, to dig her own hole a little deeper. My next task was setting up the surveillance. I dug the trail camera out of its box in the garage. It was a sturdy, weatherproof unit, modeled with camouflage patterns. I put in a fresh set of lithium batteries and a new 128-gigabyte SD card. That evening, just as dusk was settling, I walked out to the woodpile. The air was cool and smelled of damp leaves. I found a thick, mature oak tree, about 40 feet from the pile, one with a commanding view of the entire area and the gravel path leading to it. I climbed a small step ladder and strapped the camera to the trunk, about 12 feet off the ground, tilting it down slightly. The camouflage blended perfectly with the bark. From the path, it was practically invisible. I checked the field of view on the small setup screen. It was perfect. Anyone approaching the woodpile day or night would be captured in high-definition clarity. The trap was set. Now I needed to gather intelligence on my adversary. The next day, I made it a point to be out working in my front yard when I saw one of my neighbors, an older man named George, getting his mail. I'd waved to him a few times, but never spoken. I wandered down my driveway. "Morning," I said. "Mark Jennings. I'm new here." He had a kind, tired face and a firm handshake. "George Henderson, welcome to the neighborhood such as it is." His tone was laced with a weary irony. "I saw you had a visit from our esteemed president yesterday," he said, lowering his voice slightly and nodding toward Karen's house across the way. "She give you the welcome speech?" "Something like that," I said. "About my firewood." George chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Ah, the firewood. Last month it was the Wilsons basketball hoop. Before that, Maria Sanchez's kids were fined for leaving their big wheels on the driveway overnight. The chalk art on the sidewalk nearly gave her an aneurysm." He leaned in closer. "Let me give you some advice. Mark, that woman lives for this. She's been president for 6 years, ran off anyone who disagreed with her. The fines are her little piggy bank and her power trip all rolled into one. She hounded a family out of here 2 years ago because she didn't like the color of their trim, forced them to repaint it 3 times, fining them the whole way until they just gave up and sold. The stories were worse than I imagined. This wasn't just an overzealous enforcer. This was a pattern of harassment and abuse. Has anyone ever fought back?" I asked. George sighed, his shoulders slumping. "A few have tried. She buries them in paperwork, threatens them with lawyers and liens. Most people have bone and families. They don't have the time or the energy to fight a war over a basketball hoop. They just pay the fine and move on. It's easier." His words were discouraging, but they also solidified my resolve. Karen's power wasn't based on the rules. It was based on her victim's exhaustion. She was a bully who counted on people giving up. I was not going to give up. I thanked George for the information. As I walked back to my house, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. I needed to do more than just prove I was right. I needed to expose her pet parent of abuse to the whole community. This wasn't just my fight anymore. The days that followed were a strange mixture of calm routine and simmering tension. Every morning, another green envelope from the HOA would not arrive, as Karen was likely letting the fines accumulate before sending a consolidated, more intimidating bill. I imagined a ledger in her little office, my name at the top, with numbers ticking up daily. The thought was irritating, but I stuck to my plan. Patience is a weapon. Each morning, under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, I'd slip out to the woods, retrieve the SD card from the trail camera, and replace it with a fresh one. Back in my office, I'd review the footage. For the first few days, it was a chronicle of the forest's secret life. A doe and her fawn picking their way past the woodpile at dawn, a fat raccoon trying to find a way into my stack, and countless squirrels chasing each other over the logs. There was no sign of Karen or her minions. I kept the files, labeling them by date. Documentation was everything. During the days, I worked on my property, clearing brush and reinforcing a fence line, always keeping an eye on the road. I made a point of being visible, projecting an air of unconcerned calm. I also made contact with Maria Sanchez, the woman George had mentioned. I found her wrestling a stroller and 2 grocery bags out of her minivan. I offered to help carry the bags to her door. She was wary at first, but when I mentioned I was the new owner of the old Miller property and had recently had a chat with Karen, her demeanor changed. "Oh God, you too?" she said, her shoulders slumping. "What was it this time?" "My firewood," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Of course, with us, it was the playhouse in the backyard. It was painted blue, and apparently that's not an approved earth tone. We got a picture of it in the violation letter with a big red circle around it, like it was a crime scene." We stood in her kitchen while her toddler ran circles around our legs. She told me about the fines for the sidewalk chalk, the warning about the height of the grass, the notice that her garden gnomes were non-compliant decorative items. It was a constant barrage of petty tyrannies. "Why do you all put up with it?" I asked as gently as I could. "Honestly," she said, sighing, My husband travels for work. I've got 2 kids under 5. I don't have the energy to go to war over gnomes. We just paid the fine and brought them inside. It's humiliating, but it's easier. The same answer George had given me, easier. That was the currency Karen traded in. She made compliance the path of least resistance. What if it wasn't easier, I asked. What if fighting back was an option? Maria looked at me, a flicker of something, hope maybe, in her eyes. How? I'm working on it, I said. I'm just gathering information for now, but it would help to know I'm not alone. You're definitely not alone, she said, her voice firming up. You just need to find a way to get everyone to stop being scared of her. That conversation was a turning point. I wasn't just building a case for myself anymore. I was building a case for the neighborhood. That evening, I called my old friend and former platoon mate, Dave Ramirez. After his stint in the Army JAG Corps, Dave had gone into private practice, specializing in the driest, most contentious field imaginable, property law. He loved it. He saw it as modern-day siege warfare, fought with depositions and injunctions instead of trebuchets. Mark, you old dog, don't tell me you finally decided to build that illegal, unregulated suspension bridge you were always sketching on napkins, he boomed over the phone. I laughed. Nothing so grand, Dave. I've got an HOA problem. Say no more, he said, his voice turning serious. The suburban mafia, the petty tyrants of the cul-de-sac. What did you do? Paint your door the wrong shade of beige? I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the entire situation. The property line, the woodpile, Karen's threats, the official violation notice, the accumulating fines, and the stories from George and Maria. I told him I had a surveyor coming and a camera watching the pile. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mark, Dave said finally, his voice low and full of what I can only describe as professional glee. This is beautiful. This is a textbook case of overreach and abuse of power. This woman is a classic tin pot dictator, and they always make a fatal mistake. I'm counting on it, I said. Okay, here's what you do, he instructed. Keep ignoring the notices. They're legally meaningless until she tries to enforce them, which she can't, because she has no jurisdiction. Get that survey. A certified survey is your silver bullet for the property line issue. And for God's sake, keep that camera running. If she's stupid enough to follow through on her threat to remove the wood herself, this stops being a civil dispute and becomes a criminal case. Grand theft is a felony in your state over $1,000. What's that wood worth? About $1,200 plus the time I spent cutting and stacking it, I replied. Bingo, Dave said. Send me copies of everything. The covenants, the violation notice, your deed, the plat map. I'll start putting together a file. We're not just going to get the fines dropped, Mark. We're going to dismantle her. I hung up the phone feeling a surge of confidence. The pieces were moving into place. The trap was laid. The legal artillery was being ranged. All I had to do now was wait for Karen to walk into the kill zone. The day the surveyor was scheduled to arrive dawned bright and clear. I was out in the yard by 8 a.m., pretending to rake leaves but really just waiting. Right on time, a white pickup truck with the county seal on the door pulled up. A man in his late 40s, wearing a high-visibility vest and carrying a heavy-duty tripod, got out. His name was Bill. I walked down to meet him, and we shook hands. Mark Jennings, and I said, thanks for coming out. Bill Carlson, he replied, county survey team. So you just need the northern line marked and certified? That's right, I said. There's been some confusion with the local HOA about where their authority begins and ends. Bill nodded knowingly. Heard that one before. Let's get to it. Won't take but an hour or so. He set up his total station, a sophisticated piece of electronic surveying equipment, on its tripod near the road. As he began taking sightings and making calculations, a curtain twitched in the window of Karen's house across the street. A moment later, her front door opened, and she emerged, clad in a different, equally garish floral ensemble. She marched across the road and up my driveway with the determined stride of a general inspecting a new front. What's going on here? She demanded. Not of me, but of Bill. She completely ignored my presence. Bill, to his credit, didn't even look up from his eyepiece. County survey, ma'am, he said in a monotone. I'm the president of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, she announced, as if this gave her authority over county employees. I need to know what you're doing. This survey affects our community. I'm remarking the boundary of Lot 1, ma'am, Bill said, still focused on his work, as per the official plat filed with the county registrar. I decided to step in, my voice calm and polite. Morning, Karen, I hired him. Just wanted to get some clarity on the property lines. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. You hired him? Without consulting the board? You're trying to circumvent the rules. I'm clarifying the rules, Karen, I corrected her gently. It's always best to work from a firm set of facts, don't you think? She sputtered, clearly not accustomed to being contradicted so calmly. She turned her attention back to Bill, who was now walking toward the woods, carrying a bundle of wooden stakes and a sledgehammer. That line is supposed to be farther south, she declared, pointing vaguely. The HOA boundary includes the tree line. Bill stopped and finally looked at her, his expression one of polite boredom. Ma'am, with all due respect, the line is where the plat map says it is. My job is to find the original surveyor's pins, or if they're missing, to set new ones in the legally recorded locations. My equipment is accurate to within a fraction of an inch. Feelings don't really enter into it. The dismissal was so professional and so absolute that Karen was left speechless for a moment. She stood there, her mouth slightly agape, as Bill continued his work. He located an old rusted iron pin buried in the undergrowth, one of the original markers, and took a reading. He then proceeded north, along the line I had traced on my map at home. I watched, a quiet sense of satisfaction building inside me. Karen paced back and forth on the edge of my lawn, a caged animal watching every move Bill made. Finally, he stopped. He was standing about 10 feet north of my woodpile. He consulted his data collector, made a small mark on the ground, and then took a heavy steel pin, a new survey marker, from his bag. With a few powerful swings of the sledgehammer, he drove it deep into the earth, the clang of metal on metal echoing through the quiet morning. He then drove a tall wooden stake with a bright orange flag next to it. There you are, Mr. Jennings, Bill said, walking back toward me. That's your certified property line. Everything south of that stake is yours. He handed me a small, newly printed receipt and his business card. The official report and certified map will be mailed to you and filed with the county by the end of the week. Anything else I can help you with? No, Bill, that's perfect. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand. Karen stared at the orange flag. She looked at the woodpile. She looked back at the flag. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Disbelief, rage, humiliation. The physical, irrefutable proof of her error was now hammered into the ground for all to see. The woodpile wasn't just on my property, it was deep within it, with 10 feet to spare. She didn't say another word. She didn't look at me. She simply spun on her heel and stomped back across the street, her movements stiff with fury. The door to her house slammed shut with a sound that was audible even from where I stood. I knew this wasn't the end. A person like Karen doesn't accept defeat gracefully. They don't admit they were wrong. They double down. They escalate. And as I looked from the newly placed stake to the silent, watching eye of the trail camera hidden in the trees, I knew I was ready for it. The silver bullet was now chambered. With the certified survey report in hand a few days later, I felt like a commander whose artillery had just confirmed its targets. The report was a thing of beauty, cold, hard, and official. It included a newly drawn map of my property with the northern boundary highlighted, GPS coordinates, in the surveyor's sworn notarized statement. It was irrefutable. Karen's entire case against me had been built on a foundation of arrogant assumption, and that foundation had just been obliterated. My next move was to formalize my victory. I sat down at my desk and drafted a letter. It wasn't a gloating letter or an angry one. It was a precise professional communication, the kind I used to send to contractors who were out of compliance. To the board of directors of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, it began. I detailed the events chronologically. The verbal warning from Ms. Miller on October 14th, the subsequent notice of violation, and the baseless fines. I then stated, as per the attached certified boundary survey completed by the county surveyor's office on October 21st, the area in question, the location of my firewood storage, is conclusively determined to be situated on my private property, Lot 1, and falls entirely outside the jurisdiction of the Harmony Creek HOA as defined by your own covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I formally demanded three things. First, the immediate rescission of the violation notice and all associated fines. Second, a written confirmation from the board that this matter was closed. And third, a formal cessation of any and all contact from the HOA or its representatives regarding activities on the non-covenanted portions of my property. I made 2 copies of the certified survey. I attached one to the letter. The other went into my evidence folder. I sent the package via certified mail with return receipt requested. This created a legal paper trail. They couldn't claim they never received it. The little green certified mail slip came back with a signature a couple of days later. Then silence. A day passed. Then another. I checked the trail camera footage each morning. Nothing but deer and raccoons. I started to wonder if, just maybe, the official survey had been enough. Maybe faced with undeniable legal proof, she had been forced to back down. It seemed unlikely for a personality like hers, but possible. Perhaps the rest of the board had seen the letter and told her to stand down. It was on the 3rd morning after they'd received my letter that my fragile hope of a peaceful resolution was shattered. I woke just before dawn, as I always do. I went to the kitchen to start the coffee and glanced out the window that overlooks the northern part of my property. I blinked. I looked again. The space where the woodpile had been was empty, utterly, completely empty. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The massive 4-cord stack of oak, my winter's warmth, the symbol of this whole conflict, was just gone. A void of bare ground and scattered bark chips remained where it had stood tall and proud just the day before. A hot, white-hot rage surged through me, unlike anything I had felt in years. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't a nasty letter. This was theft. This was a brazen criminal act. They had come onto my land in the dead of night and stolen my property. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fury. I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight and raced outside, the cold morning air doing nothing to cool my anger. I ran to the spot. It was even worse up close. The ground was scuffed and rutted with tire tracks, heavy tire tracks, and there were hydraulic fluid stains on the ground. They had used machinery. My mind immediately flashed to the one thing that could give me answers: the trail camera. I scrambled up the stepladder I'd left leaning against a nearby tree and fumbled with the clasp on the camera's housing, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I pulled out the SD card. It felt warm in my hand. I ran back to the house, past a confused and worried Sarah, who was now standing in the kitchen doorway. "They took it," I said, my voice tight. "They stole the wood." I didn't wait for her response. I went straight to my office, slammed the door, and jammed the SD card into the reader on my laptop. The file directory popped up. My hands were shaking slightly as I double-clicked on the first video file from the previous night. The screen filled with the familiar, ghostly green of the infrared night vision. The timestamp in the corner read 2:13 a.m., and my blood ran cold. The footage was shockingly clear. A large flatbed truck, the kind a tree removal service or contractor would use, was slowly backing down the gravel path. It had a small, articulated crane mounted behind the cab. The truck stopped just beside the now empty space. The passenger door opened and a figure emerged. Even in the grainy infrared, the shape was unmistakable. It was Karen. She was wearing a hideous, bright pink tracksuit that glowed eerily in the camera's light. In her hand, she held a large flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The driver's side door opened, and a slumped, defeated-looking man got out. I recognized him as her husband, Ron, a man I'd seen mowing their lawn, always with a downcast expression. 2 other men, younger and dressed in work clothes, got out from the back of the cab. Karen was in charge. She directed the whole operation, pointing with her flashlight, barking orders that were thankfully inaudible. She gestured emphatically at the woodpile. One of the younger men operated the crane, a grapple claw descending from its arm. With sickening efficiency, they began to dismantle my winter. The grapple grabbed huge bunches of split logs and lifted them onto the flatbed. Karen stood by, supervising, a smug, triumphant expression on her face. At one point, about halfway through the process, she looked up, her gaze sweeping the woods. For a horrifying, heart-stopping second, she looked directly into the camera lens. A slow, venomous grin spread across her face. It was the look of a person who believed she was utterly untouchable, who thought she was getting away with it. She thought she was hidden by the darkness. She had no idea she was starring in the feature presentation of her own downfall. They worked for over an hour. The timestamp on the final video showed them driving away at 3:28 a.m., the flatbed laden with my oak, leaving nothing but bare earth behind. I sat back in my chair, the rage replaced by an ice-cold surgical calm. I saved the video files to my hard drive. I saved them to a cloud server. I saved them to a thumb drive. I had her. This was no longer a petty HOA squabble about aesthetics. This was grand theft, trespassing, conspiracy. She hadn't just crossed a line on a map. She had crossed a line into serious criminality, and she had delivered the evidence of her guilt directly to me, wrapped in a bow. The game had changed, and I was about to make my final move. My first call at the still early hour of 6:30 a.m. was to Dave. I didn't even say hello. "She did it," I said, my voice a low, controlled hum. "She stole the wood. I have it all on video." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "No, you're kidding me," Dave said, his voice crackling with disbelief and excitement. "A flatbed truck with a crane, and she was there directing it? Mark, this is better than Christmas." I quickly described the footage, the timestamp, the clear images of Karen, her husband, and the two hired hands. I told him about the smug grin she gave right at the camera. "She's not just a bully, Dave. She's a criminal, and she's arrogant enough to think she could get away with it." "Arrogance is the fuel of self-destruction," Dave quoted, sounding like a legal philosopher. "Okay, this elevates everything. We're on a new level now. Here's the battle plan, and we execute it with precision. Step 1. You are going to the police. Not the local sheriff's substation. I want you to go to the Maine County Detectives Bureau. You're going to file a report for grand theft, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy. Do not mention the HOA dispute at first. Just state the facts. An unknown party came onto your land with heavy machinery and stole over $1,000 worth of property. Then you show them the video." "Got it," I said, already pulling a fresh thumb drive from my desk drawer to load the files onto. "Step 2, David continued, his voice all business now. "While you're doing that, I'm drafting the civil suit. We're not just suing the HOA anymore. We're suing Karen Miller personally. We're naming her, her husband, and John Does 1 and 2, the hired help. We're going after them for the replacement cost of the wood, the cost of your survey, my legal fees, and a very, very significant amount in punitive damages for willful and malicious conduct. The video makes the willful and malicious part a slam dunk." "What's step 3? I asked. "Step 3 is the fun part," Dave said, a grin evident in his voice. "Step 3 is public exposure. Once the police report is filed and the civil suit is served, we use this evidence to utterly dismantle her power base. We expose her to the very people she's been terrorizing. We turn her little kingdom into a firing squad, and she's the only one against the wall." An hour later, I was sitting in the stark, fluorescent-lit waiting area of the county police headquarters. I had the thumb drive in my pocket and a printed copy of the certified survey in my folder. When I was called to the desk, I followed Dave's advice perfectly. "I need to report a major theft," I told the weary-looking desk sergeant. "Someone came onto my property last night with a truck and a crane and stole about $1,200 worth of firewood." The sergeant's eyes glazed over slightly. He probably heard a dozen petty, "he stole my lawn gnome" stories a day. He started to fill out a basic report, his movements slow and methodical. "Any idea who might have done it?" he asked, not looking up. "I have a pretty good idea," I said calmly, "and I have video of the entire incident." That got his attention. He looked up from his form, his pen hovering in midair. "Video?" I slid the thumb drive across the counter. "High definition, infrared. It shows the vehicle, the faces of the 4 individuals involved, and the entire theft from start to finish. The sergeant's demeanor shifted instantly. This wasn't a petty dispute anymore. He picked up the thumb drive as if it were a piece of critical evidence, which of course it was. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared through a door behind the counter. He returned a few minutes later with a woman in plain clothes. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. "I'm Detective Miller," she said, extending a hand. "Sergeant Reynolds says you have some footage for me." I was led to a small, windowless interview room. I explained the situation again, this time to a much more engaged audience. Detective Miller listened intently, taking notes. When I was done, she plugged the thumb drive into her laptop. As the video played, her expression went from professional interest to genuine shock. She watched the flatbed truck arrive. She watched Karen, in her ridiculous pink tracksuit, emerge and start giving orders. She replayed the moment where Karen grinned directly at the camera 3 times. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered, leaning back in her chair. "She's the HOA president, you said?" "That's her," I confirmed. "Karen Miller. And you have a document proving the wood was on your land?" I handed her the certified survey report. She studied it for a moment, her eyes tracing the boundary lines. "So she was notified that this was your private property. She had no jurisdiction, and her response was to sneak onto your land in the middle of the night and steal it?" "That's the long and short of it," I said. Detective Miller closed the laptop. The professional mask was back on, but there was a hard glint in her eyes now. "Mr. Jennings, thank you for this. Your documentation is exemplary. This isn't a civil matter. This is felony grand theft. We'll be opening a formal investigation immediately. Don't be surprised if you see a patrol car paying a visit to Ms. Miller's residence very soon." I walked out of the police station into the bright sunlight, feeling a profound sense of gravity and momentum. The wheels of justice, which so often grind slowly, were now spinning into high gear. The legal counteroffensive had been launched. Karen had no idea what was coming for her. She probably woke up that morning feeling powerful and victorious. She had no clue that she was, for all intents and purposes, already a ghost. The fallout was swift, and for me, deeply satisfying to watch unfold from a distance. 2 days after my visit to the police station, a marked county patrol car pulled into Karen's driveway. I was in my office, but Sarah called me to the window. We watched as 2 uniformed officers walked up to Karen's front door. She answered, her body language, even from across the street, radiating indignation. The conversation was short. One of the officers handed her an official-looking document. Her face went pale. The officers left, and the door slammed shut. The first shot had been fired. Dave informed me that the police had executed a search warrant and had interviewed Karen and her husband. They had also tracked down the tree service contractor whose truck was used. The 2 young men, when faced with felony charges, quickly gave statements, confirming they were hired by Karen for a debris removal job and were told all the necessary permissions were in place. They were likely to get a deal in exchange for their testimony. Karen, however, was not so fortunate. Detective Miller had charged her and her husband, Ron, with felony grand theft, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to commit theft. While this was happening, Dave had officially filed the civil suit and hired a process server. The next day, a man in a polo shirt knocked on Karen's door and served her with the lawsuit. He also served the HOA's treasurer, a man named Frank, who was now legally obligated to inform the rest of the board and their insurance company. The news spread through the Harmony Creek subdivision like wildfire. Whispers turned into open conversations over mailboxes and on morning walks. The story of the stolen firewood, the midnight heist, and the video evidence became local legend overnight. Maria called me, her voice a mix of shock and exhilaration. "Is it true, Mark? Did you really get her arrested?" "The police are handling it," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But yes, she's been charged." "Oh my God," she breathed. "People are talking. The other board members are panicking. They've called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night." "I'll be there," I said, "and I'm bringing my lawyer." The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. It was packed. I'd never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there must have been over 100. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. George and Maria gave me encouraging nods as I walked in with Dave at my side. We took seats in the back. At the front of the room, the four remaining board members sat at a long table. Karen's chair in the middle was conspicuously empty. The treasurer, Frank, a balding man with a perpetually worried expression, called the meeting to order. He tried to stick to a prepared statement about an ongoing legal matter and the board's commitment to a fair resolution. But the crowd was restless. "Where's Karen?" someone shouted from the front. "Why isn't she here?" Frank stammered, "Ms. Miller has been advised by her counsel not to attend." That sent a ripple of angry murmurs through the room. After a few minutes of chaotic back and forth, the board opened the floor for resident comments. This was our moment. I stood up. Dave stood with me. Frank, the treasurer, saw me and his face fell. "Mr. Jennings," he said weakly, "the board cannot comment on your specific case as it is under active litigation." "I'm not asking you to comment, Frank," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. "I'm here to inform my neighbors about what has been done in their name with their HOA dues." Karen's allies on the board tried to rule me out of order, but a chorus of "let him speak" erupted from the crowd. The board, seeing the tide of opinion turning so violently against them, had no choice but to relent. I walked to the front of the room. I didn't shout. I didn't posture. I simply told the story. I started with Karen's first visit, her threats, and the unseemly accumulation of my firewood. I told them about the fines, the certified letters, and my decision to hire a county surveyor to confirm the property line. I held up my copy of the certified survey. This document proves beyond any doubt that the HOA had no jurisdiction. I sent this to the board, hoping to resolve the matter peacefully. I paused, letting that sink in. 3 days later, my property was gone, stolen in the middle of the night. Gasps rippled through the audience. "Some of you may think this is just a dispute over some wood," I continued. "But I have the receipts, I have the documentation, and I have something else." Dave stepped forward. "My name is David Ramirez. I'm Mr. Jennings' legal counsel. With the permission of the board, I'd like to present a piece of evidence that is central to both the criminal and civil cases now pending." He had brought a small, powerful projector. He aimed it at the large blank wall at the front of the room. Frank and the other board members looked at each other in panic, but the crowd was roaring its approval. There was nothing they could do. Dave plugged the thumb drive into his laptop. The room went dark, and the ghostly green image of my woodpile appeared on the wall. The collective intake of breath was audible. They watched in stunned silence as the flatbed truck backed into view. They saw Karen, in her now infamous pink tracksuit, get out and begin her work. A wave of shock and disgust washed over the room. When the part came where she looked into the camera and grinned, a woman in the front row gasped, "Oh, that witch." The video ended. The lights came up. The silence was absolute, damning. No one could deny what they had just seen. Karen hadn't just been a bully with fines. She was a common thief, caught red-handed. The room exploded. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was a roar of outrage. People were on their feet, shouting, "She has to go. Resign, all of you. Our dues paid for that truck." The board members looked terrified. They were seeing their own potential liability flashing before their eyes. George Henderson, who had been sitting quietly, stood up. His voice, though not loud, cut through the noise. "I make a motion," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "for the immediate removal of Karen Miller as president of this association. For cause." "Second," shouted Maria from across the room. It was a tidal wave. Frank, seeing no other option, called for a vote. It was nearly unanimous. In a beige, soulless room, in front of the community she had terrorized for years, Karen's reign was ended by a show of hands. She wasn't even there to see it, but her humiliation was total. The fortress she had built with rules and intimidation had been brought down by a single, undeniable image of her own corruption. The aftermath was a cascade of falling dominoes, each one a small piece of justice clicking into place. The board, under immense pressure from the residents and their own insurance carrier, formally requested Karen's resignation from her board seat entirely, which she tendered via a terse email the next morning. Her public humiliation was complete. She became a pariah in the neighborhood she had once ruled. For sale signs appeared in her yard less than a month later. The criminal case proceeded. Faced with the video evidence and the testimony of the hired hands, Karen and her husband had no viable defense. Their lawyer negotiated a plea bargain. They pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges of theft and trespassing to avoid a felony conviction. They were sentenced to 2 years of probation, a hefty fine payable to the state, and 200 hours of community service. The image of Karen in a bright orange vest picking up trash along the highway became a new and far more satisfying local legend. The civil suit was even more decisive. The HOA's insurance company, wanting to avoid a costly and unwinnable trial, moved to settle quickly. Dave was a shark. He negotiated a settlement that was far beyond my initial expectations. The HOA's policy covered the full replacement cost of my oak firewood, which I had professionally appraised, plus the cost of the survey and all of Dave's legal fees. But the real victory was in the punitive damages. Dave argued that Karen's actions were not just negligent, but malicious and intentional, and the video proved it. The insurance company settled for a sum that was substantial enough to send a clear message. Furthermore, Dave successfully pierced the corporate veil, arguing that Karen had acted so far outside the scope of her duties that she should be held personally liable. A significant portion of the settlement came directly from her and Ron's personal assets, a painful financial consequence for their actions. The money was satisfying, but it was never the point. The real victory was the transformation of the community. With Karen gone, the atmosphere of fear and petty tyranny evaporated. An election was held for the new board. George Henderson, the quiet man who had first warned me about Karen, was nominated for president. He reluctantly accepted, and to my surprise, I was nominated and elected as the vice president. Maria Sanchez joined as the secretary. Our first act as the new board was to conduct a full review of the CC&Rs. We held open meetings, inviting resident feedback. We systematically rewrote or eliminated the vague, subjective clauses that Karen had weaponized. The rules about unseemly accumulations, the approved colors of playhouses, the sidewalk chalk regulations, they were all consigned to the dustbin of history. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to genuine community enhancement. The final symbolic act of my victory came a few weeks later. A lumber company delivered a massive load of freshly split oak, 6 cords this time, more than I had before. I spent a sunny weekend stacking it, with George and a few other neighbors stopping by to help. We stacked it in the exact same spot as the old pile, a quiet monument to property rights and the successful defeat of a bully. It stood there solid and defiant, a testament to the fact that one person, armed with patience, precision, and the truth, could indeed fight City Hall, or in this case, the Harmony Creek HOA. As I placed the last log on the stack, Sarah came out with 2 glasses of iced tea. She looked at the woodpile, then at me, a proud smile on her face. "Winter's coming," she said. "Let it come," I replied, putting my arm around her. We stood there for a long moment, looking out over our land. The woods were quiet, the air was clean, and a sense of hard-won peace had finally settled over our home. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been meticulously engineered, built piece by piece, just like the stack of wood that would keep my family warm through the cold months ahead. The fight had been long and stressful, but in the end, we hadn't just won back our firewood. We had won back a community.